rejoice in our own positive actions. So bring to mind positive things, positive karmic actions that you do. Your body, speech, mind. And rejoice. How wonderful. You can really rejoice because by doing those actions, right, you create happiness for yourself, happiness for others. There's happiness in this life, happiness in future lives, liberation, full enlightenment. So you can rejoice in every moment of love, loving kindness, every moment of compassion. You can rejoice just in having come here. You came out of a sincere sense of wanting something higher, some spiritual practice, to pursue your spiritual path towards enlightenment for others. Rejoice in each moment you've spent studying Dharma books, listening to teachings, contemplating, meditating. Every effort you've made to try to understand something deeper about the nature of reality. Every moment you've spent trying to understand how to transform your mind, transform yourself into something more of greater benefit to others. Every time you've thought about bodhicitta, especially, every time you've thought about emptiness, these are things really to rejoice in. Each person here, you've done so much, right? So much also kindness to others. Everyone you've ever helped, whether you've helped somebody who is sick, helped someone who is grieving or depressed, helped somebody who is in need. And everybody here, you've done so much generosity. Giving to others. Many times you've been patient when you could have gotten angry. So much to rejoice in just of your own good deeds, because these will lead you to happiness, will lead others to happiness. Create the cause for you to be able to lead others to happiness. Any vows you've taken, refuge vows, layperson vows, bodhisattva vows, tantric vows. And every effort you've made to keep those, there's so much cause for rejoicing. How wonderful, how marvelous, how beautiful. Take a few minutes to expand your rejoicing out. To rejoice in all the similar good deeds of other ordinary beings, and then the amazing, totally inconceivable, just miraculous good deeds of the Arya beings, Arhats, the foe destroyers, solitary realizers, the bodhisattvas, the Buddhas. So just take a few minutes to kind of rejoice in the positive deeds of others. How wonderful that there are people who are working to benefit others. Whether it's ordinary beings, doctors, nurses, teachers, friends, parents, grandparents, people caring for elderly relatives. So ordinary beings like that. And then great beings, right? Their meditative concentrations on emptiness, their realizations of bodhicitta, and so give a few minutes to meditate. So meditate just for a little while on rejoicing in the good deeds of yourself. lastly, while we're still in this meditative mode, one last thing, just to set our motivation clearly. Let's just remind ourselves, first of all, this human life we have right now is extremely precious. Even one day, even 1 hour, right, with this kind of body and brain, you can contemplate, train its, kind of reprogram or retrain itself. This kind of mind that human beings have is so precious. So we don't want to waste our life. We certainly we don't want to waste today. And so our purpose today then is compassion and bodhicitta. So just as we ourselves suffer and are subject to all kinds of sufferings in the future, so are all other beings, human and non-human alike. So generating a sense of compassion, wishing ourselves and all others to be free from suffering. Feeling, especially that the terrible sufferings of limitless others are totally unbearable. That we have to do what we can. The very purpose of our existence, the purpose of our lives, is not to harm ourselves and others, is to bring some kind of benefit. So we feel our purpose for today is that kind of compassion. And our purpose for this class together, this meditation together, discussion, is for sure, right, to increase our understanding a little bit, our wisdom, our behavior, so that we can be of more benefit to ourselves and others. So our motivation for contemplating and discussing today is compassion for ourselves, compassion for others, and especially its bodhicitta, the wish to achieve full enlightenment in order to most effectively benefit all sentients. And that's the deepest purpose, right, for discussing Dharma together. So we assert to ourselves in our heart, that's my motivation today. So we can kind of come to a more interactive mode. More about karma today. So I want to say a couple things, like a couple of general comments, then we'll get to some specifics. Like the whole purpose of studying the Buddhist teachings on karma, right, is to become more skillful, right, in regards to our own actions, right? Karma means actions, so our own actions of body, speech, and mind. And I'll say a few other things, like sometimes actually people present, like sometimes you'll see actually even in some, sometimes even in Buddhist books you'll see things like this, where somebody will say something like, oh, I meditate on emptiness, or there are different ways to say I meditate on emptiness. They can say I meditate on emptiness, or I meditate on Mahamudra, or I meditate on Dzogchen, or I meditate on great bliss, realizing wisdom, different terms they use, but it all means meditation on emptiness. And then sometimes people say, so I'm beyond karma. Sometimes people say that, or like I've transcended, or I'm beyond good and evil. Sounds like Nietzsche, who was a nihilist. And that's nihilistic view, actually. It's actually a wrong understanding of Buddhism, right? So Lama Tsongkhapa, in line with Nagarjuna, who was the great, and Chandrakirti, so the great explicators of emptiness pointed out, the more you understand emptiness, actually, the more careful you'll be in your behavior. Right? The more careful you'll be in what you do with your mind, and your speech, and your body. So if you're ever meditating on emptiness and you come to some idea that what you do doesn't matter, then you've misunderstood emptiness. Because the meaning of emptiness is dependent is that things are dependent, right? Are interdependent and dependent, especially dependent arising. And so if things are interdependent and arise in dependence upon other things, that means what arises is due to causes and conditions. Right? So if you understand emptiness, then you understand that everything that happens is because of creating the right causes and conditions or the wrong causes and conditions. So actually, when you meditate on karma, then it'll bring you closer actually to understanding. Nagarjuna pointed this out, who explained emptiness so clearly. He said if you meditate on karma, then you'll come closer actually being able to realize emptiness. And if you realize emptiness, your understanding of karma will actually become deeper. I just wanted to say that because sometimes you'll hear actually sometimes in some books or something, somebody will say something like that. They'll say something like, "Oh, I transcended that," but actually it's a wrong understanding. Actually, in a sense, I mean, of course, Buddhas, right, fully enlightened beings, are beyond suffering. But even Buddhas aren't, actually, in one sense, even Buddhas are not beyond cause and effect, because actually Buddhas want to benefit all sentient beings, but they can't actually enlighten everybody because of cause and effect. Whereas they can arrange situations to try to teach others, but then it's up to the other person, right? And they can't, Buddha said that, right? I can't pour water on you and get you enlightened. I can't, shoot light, in other words, I can't force you to become enlightened. The Buddha said that, right? He can just teach the path. So in that sense, even the Buddhas are constrained by cause and effect. So in a sense, nothing's beyond dependent origination. Nothing passes beyond dependent origination. So then also I wanted to say, regarding a little more about karma, right? Like in terms of being skillful. Actually, Lama Tsongkhapa points this out. He says, it's actually an old saying, I guess, in Buddhism, but it says, for foolish people, even small negativities create a lot of problems, and for wise people, even when they make mistakes, it's not such a big thing. Whereas in other words, if you know how to work with karma, then you know how to, if you understand the teachings on karma, then you understand that everybody makes, in other words, if we're not enlightened, we're going to make mistakes, but you understand how to work with those. Right? But if you don't know the teachings on karma, then you don't know how to work with those, and so you make it worse. And so that's what we want to talk about a little bit today, is how to be skillful. Now, one thing I'm not going to cover today, because we're going to cover it next class, is purification, how to purify negative karma. We're going to do 2 whole day-long retreats on that. So I'm not going to cover that today, because that's going to be a big topic that we'll go into a lot of detail about. So that's a big part of being skillful with karma, but that's not the part I'll cover today. But in general, right, we have to do our best to stop doing negative actions, to engage in positive actions, to purify our negative karma, and to rejoice. Right? But then our life is short, so what I want to talk about today is a little bit is how do you be skillful in knowing what positive actions to create. Does that make sense? Next time we'll deal with purification, but today a little bit about how do you be skillful in knowing what positive actions to create. So I want to say one other thing though about karma in general before we get into that too, because it's related, is another thing, this also relates to dependent origination, right, is if you look at the teachings on karma, it's quite interesting, because on the one hand, you're completely responsible for yourself, right? In other words, the teachings on karma imply that, right? In other words, if you cultivate love, then you're creating positive karma. If you cultivate anger, if you let your mind dwell in anger, then you're creating negative karma. So on the one hand, you're completely responsible for your own actions, right? On the other hand, your actions are always relational with others too. So it's an interesting truth about, if you notice that, right? Like, because if you look at if you look at the 10 negative actions, right, that we talked about last time, like killing, well, you kill somebody else. Right? Stealing, there has to be another person there to steal from. Right? Lying, the definition of lying is somebody else, you're deceiving somebody else, right? You're saying something untrue to somebody. Even the ones of mind, right? Covetousness, right? It means you're wanting something somebody else has. And ill will means you want to hurt somebody else, right? So if you look at them, it's always relational, right? So our karma is very much embedded in our relationships with others. And both the actions are embedded in that sense, right? Like if you're harming somebody else, and then also the results are often embedded in our relationships with others, right? And something else about that too is that actually even Buddhahood itself, right? Like if you actually read the stories of the Buddha, right? They say that in some sense a Buddha, by definition, is relational, right? In other words, a Buddha creates a Buddha realm in which they enlighten others. And you know, when you read the stories of Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical, you know, there are many Buddhas in Mahayana Buddhism, but if you read the stories of this historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, you know, who lived in India 2,500 something years ago, you see that, right? Like he'll sort of say, you know, you'll see that these beings will come and take teachings from him and gain some level of realization. You know, then somebody will say to him, why'd that happen? How'd that happen that all those beings gained that realization? And basically he'll say, well, you know, in this lifetime, I had this relationship to them. In that lifetime, I had that. And basically he's been, that part of his own process of becoming enlightened was leading them to the moment where they could also become more enlightened. You know, and so even his enlightenment is for others, right? So it has to be relational. And relational doesn't mean, right, that he can, just because he's a Buddha, like go like that, right? He had to set up the causes, right? First, because he doesn't have, the Buddhas are not omnipotent, right? So he had to create the relational causes for somebody to have a relationship with him and progress in their own spiritual practice. So then there are many stories where, like, in the lifetime of the Buddha, he would say one word to somebody, and boom, they would become enlightened. You know, that wasn't because of magic. That was because, you know, he had meditated with that person a few thousand times over different lifetimes, right? And they were finally ready. And then in that lifetime, because of their previous practice, they had meditated and cultivated all these different, you know, levels of concentration and levels of understanding, but they didn't quite yet understand reality. And then one word from the Buddha, and boom, they can understand reality. But you see, it's not, what's the word? That's not a causal. There were causes for that moment to happen. So I'm just pointing out that just like the nature of karma, and that it's relational, and that it's, and so, you know, so part of what I want to talk about today is this. So how do we start, you know, like we meet with all kinds of suffering, right? Because of ignorance, right? In other words, that's the basic Buddhist tenet, right? You meet with suffering because of ignorance, because we create the wrong causes, right? We create causes based on anger, right? You're angry, and then we've gone over this in the first class, right? So you're angry, and then you shout at somebody, which is harsh speech, and you make them feel bad. You do that because you want to be happy, and you only suffer, right? And we point that out, right? When you say when you feel the anger at the person, you're miserable. When you say the negative words to the person, you're miserable. Now you've also made them miserable, right? Then they get angry back at you, right? And then you're creating a cause, so in the future, you're going to have more problems with that person, right? So that's how negative karma functions, right? And we're good at that, actually, you know, naturally, right? Same thing with, like, craving, right? Like, Lama Tsongkhapa pointed this out so clearly, right? How, like, you know, you want to be happy, right? So you think, you know, oh, I have to, like, you know, I have to get, like, well, give an example, like, well, let's take an example, like, I'm suffering, but if I could go to the store and get this kind of, you know, an eclair, let's say, right, then I'll be happier. Right? So you go and get the eclair. Then maybe the eclair is not quite as good as the one, like I had that experience when I went and got it, and I thought, this isn't as good as the ones I had when I was a kid. It's not quite working, you know, but I'll eat it anyway, so that was the store. Right, you know, and then, okay, yeah, then for me, if I do that, then, like, sometimes later, if I eat that, then, like, my stomach's not so good later on, right, so then I have that suffering, right? Then gain some weight, that's not so good, you know, then I have to worry when I get my cholesterol checked, it's not gonna be that great, you know, right, so it leads to all kinds of, you know, and then you do that to be happy, but then it leads to all kinds of complications, right? You know, then you hear, then, like, you talk, I'll give my, this is my, right, then I talk to my uncle, and he just had, you know, what's called bypass surgery, and I think, wow, headed in that direction, I better be careful. So, just give you an example, right, so, like, you're creating, right, and then it creates it compounds the karma, where then next time you're suffering, you think, oh, I want to have an eclair. Just give you an example, right? Like, and then it goes on and on endlessly. Does that make sense? So that's how karma, that's how the negative process of karma works. So one is if you want to be happy, you have to stop that. Right? There's no way, whereas there's no choice. It's not like you can think, I want to be happy, I want to be happy, I want to be happy, and you'll be happy, right? I thought that, like, an analogy for that, like, if you were to say, like, for 10 years, if you were to think, it'd be really nice if there were blueberries growing in my yard, right? And if every day you thought, I really wish there were blueberries growing in my yard, like, that wouldn't help one, there would never be a blueberry from that, right? Not even one blueberry would grow from it, right? In other words, you have to have that motivation, but then you'd have to plant blueberry bush, right, and fertilize it, and water it, and weed, right, when it's small. You know, then eventually, of course, there might be blueberries, or there might not, depending on if the deer can eat. But there's a chance that there will be blueberries, right? And if you really take good care, if you put a fence around it or something, or you know, then for sure there will be blueberries, right? If you do all the causes and conditions, then definitely you'll have blueberries, right? So it's similar, right? In other words, if you want to create positive results, then you have to create the causes. And so actually, even enlightenment itself, even Buddhahood, is actually just the process of creating the causes, right? They say that a Buddha is, if you want to become a Buddha, you have to create, they say, two vast collections. One is a collection of wisdom, which means meditation on emptiness. You have to meditate more and more deeply on the nature of reality. And the other is you have to do vast positive actions to create the causes to become enlightened. Right? And even within samsaric existence, you have to create the right causes if you want to have the right results. I want to go through two different topics today related to that. One is, and this applies to positive or negative actions, but I want to just talk a little bit about what makes karma powerful. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche and actually Lama Tsongkhapa, all the Lamas say that how quickly, you know, like in other words, sometimes somebody will ask, well, can karma ripen in this lifetime? You know, or does it always ripen? And actually, karma can ripen in this lifetime, in your next lifetime, or many lifetimes in the future. And that depends how powerful the karma is. So I want to talk a little bit about what makes, a Buddhist view, what the Buddha said about what makes karma powerful. Does that make sense? And this is like, on the one hand, there's two reasons to teach this. So the Lamas teach it in the topic on karma. One reason to teach it is, if you understand what makes a negative karmic action powerful, you know what to avoid, right? The other is, if you know what makes a positive karmic action powerful, then you know what to do, actually, right? The best things to do. So I'm going to go through there were different lists, different lamas, different, like a Sangha taught one list, and there are different lists of things that make karma powerful. But I'm going to go through some of the key ones, okay? And these are worth contemplating a bit. So the first one is who you do the action in relation to. The nature of the recipient of the action, their relationship to you, because karma is relational, right? So who they are to you makes a difference. And I'll go through a few examples of this, right? Like, there are many examples of why who you do a karma in relation to impacts your result. So actually, one is, if you do something, negative karmic action to anybody creates suffering, right? But if you hurt somebody who is particularly kind to you, it's worse for you. Does that make sense? So it's not in their nature of who they are, right? But you know that, right? If somebody goes out of their way and does lots and lots of kind things to you, and then you hurt them, actually deep in your heart, you know that was really, I mean, it was wrong to hurt anybody. When somebody really made a lot of effort to help you and then you hurt them, you know in your heart there's something worse about that. It's like, there's something quite, it's almost like what do people say, like, oh, that's not worthy of a human being or something, right? Like, people should repay kindness, not return it with harm. So, so if you hurt somebody who was never kind to you in this life, that's bad. But if you hurt somebody who was really kind to you, that's kind of worse. Then there's like another thing also is like for example, it's a negative action. Like the example of killing, they sometimes say, killing an animal, killing an ant is bad. Is actually a negative karma, right? But killing a human being is a worse negative karma, right? Well, that's clear. We all know that in a sense. But part of the reason is that a human being has something more valuable, which is a human life is more helpful to them. Not that they're more intrinsically valuable than an ant. Actually, they're not. But what they have at that moment is more valuable. So it's like stealing $1 million from somebody versus stealing a penny. Does that make sense? Or is this more valuable to the person's karmic process? You're interrupting something really important for them if they have a human life, especially if they're using it well. The Dalai Lama sometimes jokes though. He says like, if somebody has a human life and they're using it well, then it's quite good. If somebody has a human life and then they're using it poorly, then of course that they're worse than an ant. Not that you should kill them. But he says actually it's worse because you have a human brain, and then if you're using that to harm people, then it's really terrible. But then I want to go through also Buddhism then talks about this, that there's also a bit of in terms of powerful karmic objects for oneself. And again, these are not intrinsic necessarily to the object in some cases, but I'll just share it because I think it's an interesting teaching, and it's taught by the Buddha. So the Buddha said also that so among beings if you do a negative action to your parents, is considered particularly negative. Now again, that's not, in other words, they're just your parents, so it's bad, it's worse karma for you. But there are many teachings that the Buddha taught about that. He says, there was harming your parents in some ways considered worse than harming a stranger for you. Then also harming monks and nuns is considered a particularly heavy negative karma because they're embodying the teachings, or trying to embody the teachings at least. So harming them is considered negative. Then they say really horrible, actually Shantideva says this, a really terrible negative karma is harming bodhisattvas, right? Because they're trying to benefit all beings. So if you're interfering with that and trying to harm them, again, it doesn't hurt them really. According to the teachings, actually a real bodhisattva practitioner, they're quite pleased if you're trying to harm them. But for you, you create a lot of negative karma, actually, right? So it'd be like somebody trying to, think about it this way, like if you give a hard time to just a random person on the street, that's different than, like, for example, like, if you think of what, like, I'll just give you an example of what Mother Teresa was doing, right? And if you interfere with that and try to stop her, right, well then you're not just harming her, you're harming a lot of people, right? Because she was helping a lot of people. I'm just giving an example. Or if you try to stop the Dalai Lama from doing something, right? Well, he's helping so many people, so you're harming more people. Does that make sense? And actually a bodhisattva aspires, their wish is to help all beings, right? And so by trying to harm them, you're trying to stop the benefit of all beings in some way. So that's a particularly heavy negative karma. Then on that same logic, trying to harm a Buddha would be even worse, right? Because they're trying to benefit all beings. And they say and trying to help a Buddha. The opposite goes for help too, right? If you're kind to a bodhisattva and support their effort, then you create more positive karma because you're connecting to their motivation of benefiting all beings. Does that make sense? And I said this in the module on the spiritual teacher, is actually for oneself that the best or worst, depending on if you're doing a positive or negative action, is what you do in relation to your own like spiritual teacher, because they represent for you all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. That's what the teaching says. So in other words, if you relate to somebody as embodying all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, then if you make offerings to them, it's like offering to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. If you harm them, it's like harming. It doesn't really have to do with the object, though, right? In other words, that person may not even know that you're thinking of them that way or whatever. It's for you internally, right? How you're viewing the person, because karma is mainly a result of what you think and feel and how you view something. So it's not, in that case, it doesn't, the person may not even know you view them that way, but if you view somebody that way and then you do something positive in relation to them, it creates a lot of positive karma. A few other things that make karma powerful. Another one is what you, like one example, they something called the object, but it's what you give. So I'll give an example, I'm using the example of giving, you could apply this to other ones. But giving money is not as powerful as giving love. And giving love is not as powerful as giving the truth with a motivation of love. Does that make sense? So that's difference in terms of the strength, right? So if you're trying to decide what to do with your life, it's more if you're trying to decide, well, which is, again, giving money is good, but which is, if you think, well, what's the best, it'd be to give love or to give the truth or to give the dharma, let's say. That's more powerful. Another thing that makes karma powerful is if you take vows. They said that makes karma much more powerful. And I'll give an example of what that means, actually. Let's say, Lama Tsongkhapa gives an example. He says, let's say one person, doesn't kill anybody just because they don't think to kill anybody, right? It doesn't occur to them. But that's not actually, there's no motivation. Karma is determined by your motivation, right? So there's not any particular motivation there. The person didn't kill, but it wasn't a motivation, I'm going to practice nonviolence. It was just sort of a passive event that happened. For example, they never got a weapon out of it. But if somebody makes a vow and says, from this day forward, I will never kill any living being, right? Well, then they've actually created a motivation, right? And then the rest of their life, even when they're sleeping, they're keeping that. Does that make sense? Or if you say, I will never steal from anybody, no matter what happens, right? Well, that's like a vow you've taken, so that creates a karma. Does that make sense? That's different than just not stealing because you don't have the opportunity, let's say, right? So that's part of the reason why taking vows, that's one of the reasons why the Buddha taught this practice of taking vows. And there are many different levels of vows in Buddhism. So there are like refuge vows, layperson vows, novice monk and nun vows, fully ordained monk and nun vows, bodhisattva vows, and tantric vows. And each of those are actually, each of those sets of vows are more powerful than the one before. So And so if you make, so many times, but actually I want to say one other comment on that. Just like, because sometimes if you are there when a lama is around, then they'll, as part of like initiations or rituals, they'll give those sets of vows. So if you actually take them, though, it's important to know what they are and study them and then keep them. Right? So if you say, yes, I think the Bodhisattva vows are wonderful and I take those, and then you never read what they are and you don't keep them, that's not, then it doesn't have much benefit, right? So if you're going to take a vow, know what it is and try to keep it. And then another one that's really important, actually, this is quite an important one, is your intention. This is probably the most important factor. I just want to say something about that, right? Like, we said that, having a negative intention, even if the action looks positive, it's actually a negative action, right? So there's a few, we give that example, right? For example, if you give a gift, right, but your motivation is that you want everybody to think you're really wonderful, if that's your actual motivation in your heart, then that's not a positive action. On the other hand, if you, even though it looks positive, right, and if you, shout at somebody, right, in general that would look like harsh speech, but if you were doing it with the motivation of stopping them from hurting themselves, then that could be a positive. That would be a positive action, right? In other words, if you're doing that to save somebody's life. So it's the motivation that determines whether karma is positive or not. But then the power of a karma is determined by the power of the motivation and the scope of the motivation. And so this is important in terms of dharma practice, right? So I'm going to give an example of what, like if one person, right, this is a traditional example. If one person with some faith, right, so it's a positive motivation, a person has faith in the Buddha, let's say, and they light 1,000 butter lamps, which takes a long time, right? It takes a lot of effort to do that. That's a positive karma, right? Whereas they're motivated by faith, they feel some sense of refuge in the Buddha, and they want to make offerings out of respect or something like that. Well, respect is a good thing, so that's fine. So it's positive, right? But then if somebody else, they give the example of bodhisattva, right? And on the other hand, if a bodhisattva sits down and meditates on great compassion for every sentient being throughout the entire universe, and then with a mind of faith and devotion, lights just one candle, saying, I'm lighting the feeling and thinking, I'm lighting this one candle for the benefit of all sentient beings, to illuminate them from ignorance, to create the karmic cause, to illuminate, to bring light to darkness, and to bring wisdom where there's ignorance, and therefore to benefit all sentient beings, right? Actually, the person who lit that, because of the motivation, the person who lit the one candle created infinitely, not just more positive karma, but infinitely more positive karma. Does that make sense? And it's because of what was in their heart and their motivation. So, it's not just that whether the motivation is positive or negative determines if the karma is positive or negative, but it's that the scope and the depth of the motivation determines what happens. And I'll give one more example of that. It's actually a traditional example, but it's a historical example. But I was recently reading this, that Lama Zopa Rinpoche points out, that the great Buddhist master, Asanga, right? There's that famous story where he went in retreat, I've told that before, right? He went in retreat and he wanted to see the Buddha of love, Maitreya. There's Maitreya Buddha, statue. He wanted to have a vision of Maitreya and chat with him about Dharma, because there were things he didn't understand about Buddhism. And so he did 3 years of retreat meditating on love and praying to Maitreya, and at the end of 3 years he had no vision came, and he left retreat. And I always forget the order of these, but like one time he leaves retreat and he sees somebody rubbing a big piece of metal, like a metal stone, with a cloth. And he said, what are you doing? The guy said, I'm making needles. And he said, that's going to take forever. And he said, it's okay. And he said, wow, if he can do that, then I can work on my mind better. He went back in retreat. And they stayed 3 more years. And again, I may get the order of these wrong. We stayed 3 more years. Then he came out and he thought, I give up. 6 years, no vision of Maitreya, the Buddha of love, I give up, and he left. And then he saw like a deep groove in the mountain. He was in a cave, right? Or up in the mountain somewhere. So he saw this deep groove in the mountain, and he thought, wow, what caused that deep groove there? And he stood for a minute, and he watched birds flying by, and the tips of their wings would just brush the mountain in that spot. And he thought, wow, the tip of a feather? He thought, oh, they must have brushed that so many times, right? And so he thought, well, if they can wear away a mountain with just feathers, then I can work through my obstacles and say with that. And then he did another, I forget, what was the third one? Anyway, he did another 3 years. So anyway, he had done 12 years. And then he thought, that does it. 12 years of retreat and not even, like, I didn't even see Maitreya's toe, nothing, you know, like, no vision at all. And not one, like, good dream, nothing happened, you know, like, he meditated on love, and he developed a lot of love, but he had no sign of Maitreya. So he left, and then he was walking down, like, to the village, right, because he thought, that does it, you know, retreat's over. And he saw a dog laying on the side of the road, dying, like, very sick, with maggots, right, in an open wound. And they say, and he became so overwhelmed with love and compassion for that dog, right, like completely unbearable, right, the feeling that was his child, like the way a mother would feel like if they saw their child like that, right, not just like, oh, poor dog, but the way a parent would feel, right. Imagine if a mother saw their child like that, right, like a loving, loving mother saw their child, right, like some unbearable feeling, right. So he felt, I have to save this dog no matter what, right? And so he bent down and he started like trying to help the dog, but he realized he would have to take the maggots out, and then he thought, how can I take the maggots out, because he felt also unbearable love and compassion for the maggots. Now that's a sign of who he was, right? Or that something had happened in his retreat, right? And so they say he actually cut off a piece of his own flesh and put it on the ground, and then he was going to put the maggots on his flesh to give them something else to eat so he could save the dog. Right? Like like it's what a mother would do for their child, right? But he was doing it for his dog and the maggots. And so they say that he reached down, then he thought, I can't lift the maggots with my fingers because I'll crush them. So he thought he was going to push them with his tongue onto the flesh. Can you imagine that? So he went down to do that, and he kept going and going, and finally his face hit the dirt. He never touched the maggot. And he looked up, and there was Maitreya Buddha, like this, like golden Buddha Maitreya, floating in space in front of him, right? And I'll just say that. And then I think he basically said, well, where have you been the last 12 years? And I told this story before, right? That Maitreya said, I've been there the whole time, and Asanga didn't believe him. And he said, I don't think you were there. I didn't see anything. And then Maitreya said, look, here's the stain from where you spit this morning, right? It's on my robe. He said, I was right there, you just didn't see me. And then Asanga said, oh, wow, how'd you know I spit? Because it landed on me. Buddhist visions tend not to be like, they're not like, in the movies with, like, where the light rays, like how in, like the old movie of the Ten Commandments, where like, actually Buddhist visions aren't like that at all, actually. If you read it, like, not just the Asangas, all the Buddhist visions. If you read Lama Tsongkhapa's visions, like he says to Manjushri, have I realized the precise view of Nagarjuna? Have I realized it perfectly? And basically Manjushri says to him, realize that? You haven't even realized anything yet. What are you talking about? You haven't realized any of the correct views. Like Buddhist visions are not, in other words, they're real interactions in a sense. So anyway, but my point with this story of Maitreya wasn't to tell the whole story, actually, it was this. Lama Zopa Rinpoche once pointed out, he told that story, right? And then he said, so then a Sangha, right, then he went with Maitreya to Tushita Pure Land, Ganden Pure Land. And he received the 5 great treatises of Maitreya, which are still the main topics. Those are like, most of the time that the monks spend in the monastery is spent studying those topics still to today, right? So if you meet like the Dalai Lama, other lamas like that, so much of their study is spent studying topics that a Sangha received from Maitreya. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche pointed out, he said, all that benefit for thousands of years, right? People have been studying these teachings, came from one moment of love, actually, right? In other words, he never would have had that vision of Maitreya, never would have received all those if he hadn't had that one moment of love. And he said it was that love, that one moment of love was more powerful than 12 years in retreat. Right? In other words, because it was so powerful, the depth of his love. So he said, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he said, like, so you could spend 12 years in retreat or have one moment of love like that. That moment of love is more powerful for, because of the depth of your love. Now, in the Sangha's case, I think, his years of meditating on love helped him get there. That's different. But Lama Zopa Rinpoche was pointing out, it's the depth and the power of the motivation is what made it powerful. Does that make sense, kind of? Like, yeah.
I was just gonna ask, like, I don't know if the teachings talk about this at all, but is it, like, recommended to, in terms of setting your intention or whatever, to set, like, the intention, alright, I'm gonna set the intention for all beings, and, like, again, if it's not as genuine, and then try to, like, manufacture that and keep building that, or is it better to just, like, kind of start with a motivation that's more genuine, but of, a lesser scope, or, a lesser degree of benefit, or a smaller intention?
Usually the teachings say the more extensive you can do, the better. then motivate. That's the genuine. That's the actual teaching. You know, when you hear it. And I'll share an example. Sometimes, you know, because this thing of the depth and the power of the motivation being the main factor. Actually, I'm going off on a tangent again, but I'll see. I remember sometimes, like, a few times I've had the good luck to get to cook, like lunch or dinner for Lamas Operum Shake. And it's always humorous because, like, I'll give you an example. So one time it was in DC, and so I thought, okay, I'm gonna really try hard to, you know, like when you're cooking for somebody who you really care about, right, then you wanna make everything so it's gonna be hot at the same time. So I had that idea. So I thought, okay, if I cook this and I start this just at the right time and then start that, then it should all be done at the right moment, right? And so I was working really hard at that, and I thought, oh, I'll also make some, you know, I don't usually, I like cooking, but they're not fancy like that, but I thought, okay, I'll make something a little nicer than I usually would. And, you know, so then it was all, I did it just right, it all came out at the same time. So I bring it to the table, and Rinpoche comes down, and I was like, shoot, good, I did it. But I also knew this, but wasn't thinking. But so then Lamas Rinpoche, right, like, this answers your question right there, right? So then Lamas Rinpoche comes to the table, right? He says, okay, let's set our motivation for eating the meal, right? Because otherwise it doesn't become a positive karma, right? Whereas it's not a meaning if it's not positive. You know, if you don't have good motivation. So Lamas Rinpoche starts anything. He starts with the thing. So the motivation, right? He starts with, okay, so we have to meditate on compassion for each being in the hell realms. So there are the hot hell realms, cold hell realms. There's medium hell. There are hungry ghosts. There's animals. Then he starts going through the meditation on all the animals, and compassion for them. Then compassion for all human beings, every kind of human being. Right? Then the demigods and then the gods. And so, like, he went through the different kinds of suffering each being in those different realms experience, right? So eventually you actually feel it's unbearable, right? So you get this really strong feeling of, like, compassion for all beings. He says, so we're eating to sustain our body to be of benefit to all those beings, right? And so you start to feel like, some feel of inspiration. So it's like, and that took maybe 25 minutes. At that point the food's totally cold, right? But the motivation is good, you know? So then Rinpoche says, so now our motivation is good, now we have to offer the food to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, right? So then he says, okay, so first we'll bless the food, so he blesses the food, right? Then he says, now we'll offer it, and he says, so first we offer it to all the Buddhas. Right? And he describes different medicine Buddhas, Shakyamuni Buddha, 35 Buddhas of confession, the 1,000 Buddhas of this eon. Then there are Bodhisattvas, there's, you know, like Avalokiteshvara, Manjushri, Maitreya, Vajrapani, there's so many Bodhisattvas, then the Arhats. Then also you have to offer it, he said, that it's very good if you can offer it to the, all the holy objects on the planet. So there are so many, like there's this great stupa in Bodh Gaya, there's the Joel Rinpoche in Tibet, there are many, many stupas in you know, Thailand and Burma, and then there's so many holy objects that have been built around the world. But also you want to offer it to all your gurus. There's always the Dalai Lama, there's, you know, I went through like different gurus, and you know, and you want to offer, and then you want to transform it into nectar and offer it to all sentient beings. So there's the sentient beings in the hell realms, the hungry ghost realm, the animal realm, human realm, demigod realm, God realm. You want to offer it to all of them to benefit them, right? So I offer this food on behalf of all of them, you know, and then, you know, you just create a lot of merit by generating that very pure motivation, offering the food to all beings. Now you have to dedicate the merit, right? So I dedicate the merit, may I become enlightened for all beings, may I realize bodhicitta. You know, so then of course, like, you know, it's very, and like, so then you become, what I notice is like, it's incredibly pure, though, the feeling, you know, like, in other words, you really do develop that very powerful motivation. Then of course food's totally cold. Like, you know, it's like, I said, should I rewarm it? Or something? It doesn't matter. So then I thought, wow, should I have left it on the stove while he was doing that? It had to be out. But Roger tells a story sometimes on the airplane that Rinpoche would do. Right? They'd have like an international flight, you know, like those are long flights, right? That Rinpoche would like start doing that practice, right? They would serve the meal, you know, and then the stewardess would keep coming by saying, are you done, sir? Like doing all that practice, right? The same practice he had done. And then finally, like like he finishes the practice, right? And he's like ready to eat, but then they go, oh, we're getting ready to land. We have to take it. We got to eat. He said that was perfect. You know, from Lamas Rinpoche, I think said to Roger, oh no, that was the purpose of the food, was to offer it, you know, to create good karma. It wasn't not important if I eat it or not. But so to me, Lamas Rinpoche is like, and he does that with everything though. Like he'll set this motivation, like because of this point about karma, right? That there is that it's the motivation that mainly determines it. So you'll see I had the same experience when we started working on a project together one time. You know, like I was like, I sort of vaguely thought, okay, you know, doing this for all beings, and then I said, you know, all right, so what do you think about da-da-da? She said, wait, we have to set, and you know, again, like maybe 25 minutes of setting a really pure motivation, right? Because otherwise the whole project, it's like, you're working so hard on a project, but you didn't create a positive motivation to do it, what's the purpose then? You You know, because it's this factor of karma, right? That, whereas it's that depth of love. So it's to meditate deeply to generate a really strong sense of love and compassion. It's not, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? That's the reason. So, like Lama Zopa is really like unusual that way, in the depth with which he helps others to do that. You know, because I think like real, you know, like Lama Zopa and other people, like, actually he doesn't have to take that long to do that, but he's trying to show me, because I'm slow, how to do it properly. You see what I mean? Like, so I think he was doing that to show me, you know, slow down and really develop a positive motivation, because then, because also like, you know, for beginners like me, it's not easy to develop that depth of compassion, right, and like quickly. So it takes more time. So that's actually I mean, like, that's why Lama Zopa teaches it, how to do that. Is with each major important action, like eating or sleeping, it's a set of motivation, because then it becomes a positive.
Like, which would be more like karmically advantageous? Like, this is gonna sound kind of weird to put it this way, but like, if set of motivation with like 10% heartfelt sincerity to all, you know, to all beings, or like 60% sincerity and you know, like feeling to like, I'm gonna help my family or something, you know, something like that.
Can I add something to that I remember reading in our earlier Discovering Buddhism classes? I think it was Venerable Rabina. She said, "Fake it until you make it," and so that you keep sort of working on it until it becomes, you know, really a part of you, right? I think that's kind of.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because it takes habituation. That's what we would call it. And I'll say one other comment too. Like, on the one hand, like, you know, think about Maitreya's story, the story with Asanga and Maitreya, right? I mean, he only was, in that moment, he was only having love for and compassion for one being. It was just a dog, right? But it was the depth, well, not with one, because it was also the maggots, right? So maybe, I don't know, but, you know, only a few dozen beings, maybe, or something. It wasn't like thousands, even. But it was the sincerity. So on the one hand, you know, really deeply sincere, even for one being, can have incredible power. So it's not, you know, so that is very good, and there was that story tells that. But as we're cultivating it, there's a danger. So I'll just mention it because your question, I don't think you were getting at this, but I just want to say it in general because I think it's a danger that we can have, which is, you know, but the reason why we cultivate this sense of universal compassion actually is, think about it. Like, if it were just for your friend, right, or just for your family, or just for your spouse, or just for your child, then even gangsters have that, right? Like, whereas even what are they called? Like despots have that, right? They defend their child, right? Like, they kill other people to defend their, you know, like, you know, so if it's, so on the one hand, if it's deeply sincere for one being, just because that's what's arising right then that's good. But if we cultivate, we have to be careful what we cultivate. That's why we always try to cultivate this sense of universal compassion. Is otherwise, like, there's the danger, you know, for example, like, you know, like, even, like, for example, like, if an animal has very strong love for its partner, but then kills its enemy or something, you know, then we're being like that, you know, so that's not, then it's not Dharma practice, then it's liking me and dislike, you know, then it becomes like that, right? Well, I like my religion, I don't like other people's religion. I like my country, I don't like other people's country. I like my, you know, group, I don't like other people. You know, then it becomes that's not Dharma practice anymore. That's like, then it becomes, what's the word, more of an us and them kind of thing, and that's not practice. So on the one hand, if it arises very spontaneously, you just feel love and compassion for one being, then that's really good. But we want to cultivate a sense of universal compassion, because that's what's that's unique in a way, right? Because actually, you know, even the worst beings usually have some sense of attachment to somebody, right? But that's not in and of itself that beneficial. Does that make sense?
Thank you, that was very helpful. Thank you.
A few more things about karma, like, that make it powerful. I'll go through these. So another one is conditioning, right? So and habituation. I want to say that one too. So because this actually is important in terms of ripening, is what you do a lot will ripen first. Does that make sense? So if somebody, you know, if you generally are a patient person, but one time you get angry, right? Well, that's a negative karma, but you're doing your best and you're trying, and it's atypical of you. Whereas if you spend your whole life, you know, every day being angry at lots of people, that creates a much more, that karma is going to ripen more quickly and more powerfully. You know, in the same way, right, and this gets at this whole point about, this is most of what Dharma practice is actually, right, is we're not used to positive states of mind, so we have to habituate ourselves, right? And that's why, like, actually, you know, I've said this before, but the meaning of Gom in Tibetan, which is meditation, it's not technically the correct, you know, the most precise meaning of that word is habituation. So meditation is habituating, because the definition of meditation in the Tibetan tradition, in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, is habituating yourself to a positive state of mind. That's what meditation means. So, so whatever you habituate yourself to is going to ripen more powerfully and more quickly. So we have to really be careful what our habits are, right? And what we allow ourselves to habituate our mind and our behavior to. Also, I'll say this too, like, you know, when we talk about the 10 non-virtuous actions, they actually, what is it? You know, of the physical and verbal ones, they go from least to most, or from most to least powerful, right? So killing is the worst. Killing would be the worst. You know, because stealing from somebody, if you kill them, you've stolen everything from them, right? So killing is worse than stealing. Stealing is worse than sexual misconduct, and then lying is worse than gossiping, you know, and so on, right? Whereas they actually go from, in general, they go from, by their nature, some are worse than others. Right, because, you know, in other words, talking meaninglessly and wasting somebody's time isn't as bad as lying to them about something important, something like that.
Quick question. The Tibetan monks that are setting themselves on fire, I mean, is that, you know, harming yourself, or is it the motivation that cancels that? What's the...
Yeah, usually, I mean, in general, like in Tibet, in Buddhism, the teaching is that I mean, suicide, by its very nature, is a negative karmic action. But in this case, you know, it depends on the motivation. So, like, you know, on the one hand, if somebody were doing that out of anger, then that would be a negative action. But somebody asked Ken Rinpoche that question once when he was here at the center, and he pointed out that he gave the example. There was an example of one monk who had done the self-immolation, right, in Tibet. You know, you guys have seen that on the news, right? And Ken Rinpoche gave the he mentioned or talked about one example where this monk had said that you know, that he was thinking of it like that his motivation was out of love for his own people, but also love for the Chinese communists who were harming his people, as an attempt to wake them up also to the harm they were doing. And he said, so with that motivation, he was setting, this guy actually said, right before he wrote it down or something, that before he self-immolated, he said that he was doing it as a light offering, actually, that his body would be a wick or something like that. He was offering his body as a light offering to try to shine a light on something that was being missed, with no aggression towards anybody and with love towards his friends and his enemies. You know, and Ken Rinpoche said that. You can't criticize that behavior, right? It's like, and even in actually in the what's it called, the Sutra of Golden Light, right? There's a story where the Buddha in a previous lifetime. There's a famous story where there were a tigress and 4 cubs. Or was it 5 cubs? 5 cubs. The tigress had 5 cubs, and they were all dying of starvation because this tigress had gotten so weak that she couldn't hunt, right? And he offered his body to them. And the Buddha said, you know, like, actually it was interesting though in that story. They say, actually this is funny, they say in Buddhism they give a warning. They say, don't do that until you realize emptiness directly and are on the first bhumi. So it's like, don't try this at home until you're at that level. So don't go doing that yourself unless you've seen emptiness directly and are on the first bodhisattva bhumi, the ground. So he was on the first bodhisattva ground at that time, right? And so you read in the story, in the sutra, it says, he was so happy. He was like, because he was on that level. He was like, so for him, he said, oh, this is great. I've been looking for an opportunity like this. Finally, I found somebody who's in need. And he offered his, you know, so like, in that case also, right? And the Buddha himself is telling that story and saying that helped me to finish the perfection of generosity. I was trying to, because in the first bhumi, you perfect generosity, so you can give away everything, your body, your eyeballs, or whatever, it doesn't matter. In other words, you at that level of spiritual achievement, you completely achieve you completely, perfect the first perfection of generosity. So he was trying to perfect the perfection of generosity, and that helped him. You know, so he was really happy. You know, and there again, like in other words, that's not. In other words, you could say, well, he gave his life up, you know, but it was out of a motivation of compassion and for those beings and also for all beings. So it mainly depends on the motivation. So in Buddhism, for sure, suicide is considered a very negative action if it's done out of despair or anger or things like that. But in these cases, you would say it depends on the motivation if you're doing that. Maybe we're doing on time. Okay. Anyway, I guess you know, another one. I'll just give one more, and then I'll stop this thing of what makes karma. There are many things about that make karma powerful, but I thought to have one more. So also, like, you know, in addition to your motivation, if you rejoice in what you did, which is what we were practicing, if you feel good about it and take delight in it, and if you encourage others to do it, then it makes it more powerful, right? So, and that's true of negative or positive actions, right? So in other words, if you steal and you think, that's awesome, I got this thing, how great, you start bragging to, you know, other people, I stole, they didn't even catch me, you know, that makes the karma worse, right? The same thing for positive actions, right? Like in other words, if you do something to help others, and then you think, wow, I'm so happy I got to do that, I feel so grateful that got to happen, that's wonderful, and you start encouraging others, you know, it's great to go help others, this kind of volunteer opportunity is wonderful, you know, if you want to come along sometime, right, then it creates more positive, in other words, your action is more positive, that makes sense, right? So all those teachings are just to say, right, that now, like, we can think about those and then we can become more skillful, right? So like, so we can say, okay, I have this day, what should I do, right? And actually, imagine if, like, when you were making decisions about what you want to do today or this month or what your goals are, if you took those things into account more, right? Like said, well, what would be the most positive, you know, what's the most positive thing I can do? What's the most beautiful action I can do, right? Like, you know, like among all the positive things, there are actually countless positive things you could do. What's the most wonderful? It's an interesting thing to contemplate. And I'm going to say a little, now I'm going to switch from what makes karma powerful, talking just a little bit in general more about positive karmic, examples of positive karmic actions, because we went over the 10 non-virtuous actions, right? But I wanted to give examples of positive karma. So first of all, I'm going to give examples of, and this actually, I want to say something about this. What this is really is the Buddhist teachings on how to work with dependent origination playfully and skillfully, right? Whereas dependent origination is going to happen no matter what we do. So what the Buddha is saying is, well, then use dependent origination. Like, in other words, you're alive, you have a body, you have like arms, legs. Use dependent origination to create something positive. Right? And in Buddhism, they say you can, like, actually, if you think about it, what the Buddha really the Buddha's teaching is because things are empty of intrinsic, inherent existence as they appear. You can experience anything. Actually, like anything can happen if you create the right causes and conditions, right? So it's saying so this teaching is like saying how do you create the right causes and conditions for the experiences you want to have happen. Makes sense, right? And also, like, think about it, right? If Buddhism is saying you can become a Buddha, right, then anything can happen. In other words, then, like, really that's like, it's inconceivable. Because if you read the qualities of Buddha, it's like, then it's inconceivable. But I want to go through just a few things. One is some stuff Khenpo Rinpoche said. So he said, he gave an example, like, in other words, that it's just trying to get a feeling for how dependent origination and karma work. So he gave some examples. He said, offering flowers, right? And this includes whether you offer it to other people or you offer it, like, you know, to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But that offering flowers creates a cause for joy and beauty, right? To be beautiful, to have the beauty, either to be beautiful in this life or future lives, to create the karma of to have the beauty of a Buddha's form, and also the cause for joy, right? Well, that makes sense, because isn't that what flowers do? Whereas when you see a flower, you say, oh, right? Like really nice, you know, and it makes you happy, right? So it creates the karma to have, to be that in the future, to be like a flower, in a sense. You know, offering lights actually is said to create the cause for wisdom, right? For seeing emptiness, for realizing inner fire, the tumo, or inner fire that's part of tantric practice, and realizing the clear light nature of the mind. Offering incense is said to create the cause to be more ethical. Actually, I'll share experience with that. They say that because they say that actually really ethical people actually they call it the scent of morality on them. At first, when I read that, I thought I don't know what that is, and then I met one of my early teachers, Geshe Lobsang Japa, Actually, everybody who met him said, he has the same name as Kenshin Rinpoche of St. John. But everybody who would meet him was like, wow, he immediately had this aura, and almost like a scent of morality, whereas you would go near him and you would just be like, wow, like he was so upright, and he had so much character, but he was so pure in a way, that he looked pure, he had an aura of purity, and he even kind of had a scent of purity, and I was like, oh, that's what they mean by that. So offering incense is supposed to create a cause like that. Offering food, right, to other beings or to Buddhas or to teachers or whoever, is said to increase your lifespan and health. Again, that's quite logical, right, because you need food to live and to be healthy. Offering music is said to create the cause to have the Buddha's voice with 64 melodious qualities. Saving lives, actually that's a practice in Tibet, right? Saving the lives of beings who are in danger, is said to increase lifespan. So if somebody has, in Tibet they do that for like for example, oftentimes you'll see for the Dalai Lama, if they, people will go out and save yaks that are about to be slaughtered, or chickens that are about to be killed, or goats, or worms, or hooks or something. You gotta go save them. So that's an actual practice. And then actually, I want to give this too. So in the Lamrim teachings, they give examples also. They say if you want to have a long life, right? If you want to have the karma to have a long life, don't kill, be nonviolent, help sick people, and give food, right, to others, feed others. Actually, if you want to, I said flowers are a cause of being beautiful and delightful to see, but actually patience. Being patient, not getting angry, is the best cause for having an appearance that delights others. This one's interesting. I'm just giving a few examples here. If you want to have you have a good family lineage or something like that, be humble and respect and serve others. Let's skip down. I said this one last time, so I'll just mention it again a little bit, if you want to have confidence and great strength, right, then the karmic cause of that is taking on hard tasks hard to do to benefit others, right? Taking the burden on yourself rather than leaving the burden for others. And also not harming or hitting others and helping. And I want to just read a few more examples. These are actually examples of, they say that a Buddha, right, if you look at a Buddha's form, right, Buddhas are said to have many unique physical features. Actually, they say that when the Buddha himself was born, right, he was a prince, right, there was a Siddhartha, right, when he was born as Siddhartha, prince in India, right, that everybody kind of freaked out because he looked so, he was beautiful, but he had like for example, on his palms, he had the natural mark of wheels, right, like actual wheel, like naturally appearing wheel marks, and on the soles of his feet, right? And he had this kind of strangely golden color, and he had this, top knot, and people said, what's all that? And then they say, but actually in India they knew, there's a thing that they say that either somebody who has those marks on their body is either going to become a universal emperor or a Buddha. Right? And so his father said, well, I want to be a universal emperor. I don't want to. His father was a king, so he said, I'd rather be a universal emperor. But actually, in the teachings, I just thought this was quite interesting. They give examples, and again, these are just things to practice, right? So they give examples of the karmic causes for those kind of physical features. So actually, the one of having your hands and feet marked with wheels, the karmic cause of that was in previous lives when an ordinary being, when his teacher, his Dharma teacher, his guru was leaving, he would get up and serve him and kind of meet him or her, at a distance, and walk them back, and then walk them as they were leaving and escort them, and show respect for them. And so showing respect for his teachers, his abbots, his parents, and elders. I think that was the cause of that. Having very soft skin was because of offering abundant food and drink to others. And so on. There are many different teachings on that. They give different examples, like offering mattresses to others, offering soft places to sleep, offering food. So it just gives, we won't go into every detail of that, but it's like what Shantideva teaches in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, right? He gives all these beautiful examples of positive actions to do for others, right? Like, whether it's like lighting the way for people, building, you know, like building rest houses, or, you know, even like or is it maybe Nagarjuna who talks about, Nagarjuna, his letter to a king, he's giving advice to this king, and he says, you know, when you find little antils, bring out sugar cubes for them, you know, and give them some sugar so that they're not hungry. And when you're, you know, there's so many like examples of positive actions like that, right? He says to, make sure beings can get water, you know, put out bird seed, you know, whatever. And there are countless positive actions that people can do, and you know, many of them are mental, right? Like training your mind, but then also there are physical and verbal actions, right? Speaking gently to others, giving others good advice, reciting, you know, like reciting prayers and mantras and so on. So what I'd like to do, you know, every class we kind of break up into little groups and do something. So what I'd like to do today is this. You know, up till now we focused only on how to stop doing negative actions, right? So today what I'd like to do is just break up into small groups and come up, what I want to ask is a few things. Give each other examples of some, like from the guidelines of what makes karma powerful and different examples of karmic actions. What I want to do is just to have people share with each other and think together of a few particularly strong positive karmic actions that you're willing to do this week. And you be creative. In other words, it doesn't, you know, there's no prescription here, right? But something you'll do this week, and try to come up with 2 at least, right? 2 positive things that you'll do today or this week, specifically with the motivation of not just, first of all, of making yourself and others happy, but also of creating karmic causes for future happiness for yourself and others, both. Does that make sense? Okay, so go ahead and break up into groups of like 3 or 4 and just come up with ideas. And then maybe what we can do is at the end, this time I want to ask, usually I don't ask, but this time I want to ask people to share them with me. Okay, so would a few people, would a few people share at least one of your 2 ideas, or if you only came up with one, that's okay. But would some people share examples of things you'll do this week, you know, that are done with a positive, that are positive and done with a positive motivation? Anybody want to share examples? You guys shy, or nobody can? It can't be that hard to come up with positive examples. Yeah.
Well, it's going to be videotaped for eternity. It's okay because nobody in my family will watch this. Yeah, so I said one of the things was something that I really don't want to do, which is actually go and visit my mother. Yeah, don't get me wrong, I love my mother, and I don't want to explain all that and take up time. But for various reasons, which are really unimportant to waste time explaining right now, I haven't been talking to my mother too much lately, and so I will go and visit her, even though I particularly don't really want to, but and again, I will stress I love my mom, but so doing something that I don't want to do because I know that it will, I know when she sees me she's happier, and when she doesn't see me, I know that even if there's a good reason maybe why, I know that it's bringing her a little bit of suffering, like in a moment that I'm not like feeling as close to her as she would like.
You're doing it out of compassion. Compassion for her suffering.
I guess so, because I don't want to do it. I'm just being truthful.
Yeah.
Like I really don't.
But the motivation will be like to alleviate her suffering.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not doing it because I feel guilty. Because if I was feeling guilty, I would have been visiting her all along now, out of guilt.
Yeah.
I'm also Jewish, so I have a lot of guilt. But like I try to. It's like, you know, it's instilled in us. I'm from a Jewish girl from New York, so it's like, yeah, guilt is like.
Well, that's part of the reason I asked was like, yeah, that's a good example though, right? If you did it out of guilt, that wouldn't be a positive motivation. Whereas if you did it out of compassion for her suffering, like sort of feeling you don't want her to feel lonely, and then that's positive, right? Like there's a sense of wanting to alleviate her loneliness or sorrow. That's compassion. Yeah,
I think she'll actually just feel a little lighter and a little better if she sees me, even if it's just for however long, you know.
That's cool.
So I'm not sure I'll feel that way, but I'll try to.
Well, but actually, one thing I'll encourage that is this: is to feel like if you emphasize the side that you made her feel lighter, right, in your mind, if you think that, and as you drive away, if you rejoice that you made her feel lighter, that makes it even more powerful.
I can do that.
Like to think, great, I made her feel lighter, I made her feel that. Like then it's more, you know, or is it also lifts your spirit a little bit? maybe the visit doesn't, but the thinking that you succeeded in your goal of making her feel lighter is good.
Yeah, I have to work on being a better daughter, so I'm well aware of that, but, you know, that's not a topic for right now.
That's a good example, it's positive. Yeah, other examples? I think that's a great example. Again, because also she's a you know, and again, if you do it with rejoicing, and then also she's a, what's the word? You know, the parents are, what's the word? Important karmic relationships and all that, and so it's a good example.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, like, she brings me pain, so that's, no, I know, I'm being truthful, like, really being honest right now, like, part of the reason I'm just not talking to her right now is because, like, of the tremendous pain that she brings to me. You know, whether it's my perception or it's me, like, interpreting, it doesn't matter how, who, why, what,
That's your
she, I, whatever, it's pain, so.
So it's brave.
I was saying that I haven't been wanting to meditate because when I meditate regularly, I see the bad stuff that I do, and so I don't like that. Like when I first started coming to this group, every day I was like, oh, I'd spend like not a lot of time, just like 5-10 minutes. But like last night, I was going to bed and I looked at my Kindle and I looked at my altar, and I chose my Kindle, and I guess like my motivation to meditate, the good thing I will do is I will set my motivation to meditate to see the bad things so that I change them and stop turning away in ignorance, because it's a very hard choice to make, like at 12 at night, like my Kindle room. And so the good thing I'm gonna try to do is like choose my altar. The end.
So so far we have two brave examples actually. Like, both are brave, facing a challenge in different ways, but it's also brave, right? To face your things you don't want to necessarily see. Let's put it that way. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, other examples? Wow, nobody in this group came up with any examples.
we came up with one, but it's not. Very, very unusual example that we have here. You know, I get a lot of stink bugs in my house. so I got like a ton of stink bugs in my house.
Yeah.
And then I was trying to like shoo them away before. I was trying like not to hurt, you know, because they're sentient beings and I don't want to hurt them. And I'm just trying to like, but they're like invading, trying to. So I grabbed the towel and I was like shooing them like this, like that. But then accidentally I hit one, and like, and it fell down on the ground. And I felt bad, you know, because I was like, oh no, I didn't want to kill it or anything like that. So it was like upside down, I was suffering. So I shoot it back up, and I was like, how am I gonna get rid of all the stink bugs? You know,
Leaf blower
there's,
game.
like a lot of
They're
them.
all over my house.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a good idea.
So I guess what I said is that I'm going to come up with a way of like getting rid of them without, you know, hurting them. So because I was trying to, but I did it, I still hurt them.
Maybe the
Employ
leaf
the
blower?
kids and have everybody help you catch them in cups, and then you set them free outside.
That's one way, but they're like in the ceiling.
Vacuum cleaner game. I had the same problem. I vacuum them out and then take them out and empty the vacuum outside.
And they
They
live through it?
survive.
It's a canister, it's not a bag, so.
It's not a true vacuum. They're still living in there.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you gave suggestions.
But yeah, that's there are others. But
It's too private. Yeah, anybody else want to share examples to inspire
Okay.
others, or?
I'm gonna take on the karmic result to, I guess, work harder by being happy that my neighbor throws all his sticks in my yard when I leave my house, and I get to pick up all his yard work. And he's retired and has a leaf blower, so it's some work. Instead of being angry.
So it's patient, right? It's a
And
practice
throwing
of
him
patience.
back too.
What's that?
Instead of being angry and putting him back.
Because then they just keep going back and forth.
Yeah, I'll just pick
I
him
guess
up.
that's fine. And throwing him back would create the karma to have him come. That would go on endlessly, right? Then you guys will be neighbors in many future lives.
There's a connection for sure.
Oh, so you're gonna end the negative connection by
Yes.
practicing patience. Because that is part of the trick of karma, though, right? In other words, you throw it back thinking that'll make it. You know, it's like a boomerang or something, right? I mean, that's karma, right? You throw it back thinking, oh, I'll get rid of it, but the karma is right that then they throw it back again, right? And it's weird to think that then that goes on. That the Buddhist view would be that goes on then for lifetimes, right? Then they're your neighbor again, and again, next time it's something else, right? So that's great. So practicing patience is ending it. It's great.
Yeah,
right?
and
Plus
stopping
you're
that
protecting.
anger.
Plus you're protecting his mind, right? Because if you put it back, then he gets mad, and then he makes bad karma. So actually, by you practicing patience, you're also helping him.
Yes.
Yeah. Pretty cool. Yeah, anybody else?
I've been being requested to come help and putting off, so I guess I'll go.
Tone is a little like yours. It's like, yes, I'll go. But like, it's that overcoming
I'll try
something,
to
right?
go with
Yeah.
a better attitude than.
So, I know. Well, it's a little like that. You know, it's like some overcoming and almost. Yeah.
I didn't say this in my group, but last week I picked up some trash in the field where I go to something every week, and I don't know, I just felt like I wanted to keep the field clean because I appreciate the beauty of it so much and what it gives us every week. When we go there and all the little animals, so I think picking up trash sometimes, like wherever you are, is really, I don't always do that, but it's I felt inspired to last week and I felt so like happy when I did it. And then I saw lots of little animals like after that, and I was so happy that, I don't know, I felt like they were showing themselves to me more because I did that. I don't know if that's true, but
And that's an example of what I was saying earlier about like, your experience that you just described is an example of what makes karma powerful in terms. There's one. I mentioned it very briefly, but when you do a positive action and you take real delight in doing it, like where you really feel that sense of delight, it makes it more powerful because it leaves a stronger imprint in your mind, right? Whereas if somebody just picked up trash without, that's good no matter what, right? It's a good thing to do, but when you really feel the sense of appreciation and gratitude and then delight, it makes, it leaves a stronger imprint in your mind, the motivation's stronger, and so it's a more powerful karma. So that's a great example.
well, and like I saw an animal, I've been going to that field since, I don't know, maybe March, like, not every week, many, many weeks almost, and I saw an animal on the ground that I had never seen there before, so.
That's great. There's some feeling also of connectedness, right?
That was one of mine. Remember to rejoice, because I forget that all the time. I don't.
It's such a good practice. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll make some comments. Actually, I'm gonna say something like if you, actually, well, I'll say it this way, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, right, who's the spiritual director of FPMT, that the center's part of, like really, actually, if you, I was telling an example of him with the meal, right, like, his incredible motivation in eating the meal, but if you read, like Lama Zopa has so many teachings online, like on the FPMT website, Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, and, but when he teaches, he emphasizes so much this whole point about karmic cause and effect, and he's so like, I think actually, like, especially he's always been that way, and in recent years even more so, like about this whole thing of motivation and then action, right? And like Lama Zopa with bugs, I'll give an example, right? Like he created, it's funny, on the FPMT website they have it, right? It's a little like bug catcher that has all these mantras and prayers on it, so you're blessing them as you catch them and take them outside. And the way Lama Zopa talks about that, right? Like sometimes people go to him and they complain, right? Oh, I have all these bugs and I have to kill them. And I know you wouldn't kill them, I'm just giving an example, right? Somebody says, oh, and like, And Lama Zopa immediately, like his view, right, is like, oh, you're so lucky. Those are like, or is like you're connecting with beings, and those are like you know, or is like it's hard sometimes to find beings to benefit, right? Like sometimes you can be somewhere and it's hard to find anybody to benefit. Those bugs totally need benefit, you know. It's like Lama Zopa, right? He like built whole stupas, right? Like actually would have stupas built, right? So he could like catch the bug, then he would like recite mantras to it while walking around the stupa, right? And he's praying like, may you be my disciple, you know, may you be my disciple in the future. May I, you know, like may you be my student and may I lead you to enlightenment, right? And then he takes the bug outside gently, right? And actually sometimes I think that, you know, when I think about myself, I think that's how I got connected with Lama. So I was a bug that, you know, like that wandered into his house and, you know, carried me around the stupa. It has to be, because I think, well, I don't have much, you know, it must be something like that. You know, so, like, so Lama Zopa would say, oh, that's great. Like, so, you know, if you go to Lama Zopa and something like that, oh, these bugs came in my house. Like, you say, oh, you're so lucky. You take a little stupa like that, you know, just a small one, you can carry them around it, and each one is like your future, you know, because he would say each one was your mother. Like, think like that, you know, each one is your child. Like, he would say, like, meditate like that, you're like so precious, you know. You can almost cry as you let them go. I'll see you again. You know, people come back. You know, come back as a human being. Come, you know, come. We'll talk. I'll teach you Dharma. I'll teach you about the meaning of emptiness and bodhicitta and compassion. And, you know, like so. I'm just giving you the example. Like, and like, actually, I'm going to share a funny one. Even like my like even so, Lama Zopa does everything, right? So even like I don't know. He didn't teach this one. Actually, my friend did, but. My friend was saying, he went to Lama Zopa and said, he said, this friend of mine, actually Roger Monroe, he went to Lama Zopa one day and he said, you know, Rinpoche, I'm trying to transform everything into Dharma, so now when I pee, you know, I think, like all the beings in the rivers, all the beings in the ocean, you know, depending on which side, right, there's like what's called watersheds, right? So like this side, right, it's the Chesapeake and then to the whole Atlantic Ocean, you know, may my connection, you know, may I connect with them, maybe I'll be my disciples, may I be of benefit to all beings in the entire, like, you know, eastern seaboard and out into the Atlantic. Well, the Atlantic connects to the Indian Ocean eventually, may they be benefit, you know, and so my friend, he said like he did some motivation like that when he was peeing, he said to him, so what do you think? So I said, oh, that's great, you're trying to turn everything into Dharma, that's really good. You know, like he was encouraging him, you know, but, because the point is that, like, it's funny, right, but I mean, it's true, actually, the point is like, you can transform anything, right? So like, recently at the retreat, like before Lama Zopa had the stroke, right, at the retreat he was giving in North Carolina. So he was saying to people, like, so how do you transform standing up from a chair into Dharma? You know, how do you transform that? And like sometimes people, you're like, oh, I hadn't thought about it. Or something. You know, how do you transform like, you know, walking somewhere to Dharma, right? Like he was giving these examples, right? And he was saying like, so that and you know, like, it doesn't have to be something hugely intellectual here, right? It's how do you make, whereas it's neutral, right? You're just walking and going, oh, like you're walking with a negative motivation or a neutral motivation, versus the point is if you're walking with love, then it's a positive karmic action, right? Like if you think I'm walking right now to benefit somebody, right? Like to go somewhere to be of some use to others, right? And Lama Zopa often talks about work, right? He said like, you know, if people go to work and if your thought is I'm going to this job because I want to make a living so I can have money, right? Well, that's not a positive motivation in and of itself, right? It's not bad, it's not something harmful to others, but there's nothing particularly meaningful in that, right? They would say like, you know, what's the word, everybody does that, like, you know, even animals don't think of money, but anyways, like, that's not anybody, anyways, everybody tries to survive, right? Like, that's just a survival instinct. That's, I guess, what I'm saying. And, but so like Lama Zopa would say, so how can you, he often taught on this for many years, it's like, so how do you transform your work into Dharma practice, right? So if you think, I'm going there, like, you know, yes, as a side thing, of course I have to make enough to live, but the main thing is like, there's so many chances to practice patience, it's great. There's so many like people, you know, hopefully there are people give me a hard time, and I can practice patience. You can't become a Buddha without patience. So I need to go someplace where there are people who give me a hard time, works good for that. Then also I'm in Washington DC, it's great, there's traffic, so I can have like difficult, you know, like, that's great, I can practice patience with people who are driving, you know, like, so my reason to go to work, right, and then also hopefully I can benefit somebody, right, there are people there, my real job is to be, like, so you would say like, if you took the Bodhisattva vow, right, like they would say the real job is to be a benefit to all beings, and as a side job you also do whatever, like you signed up on your contract, whatever, you know, you're under your, what's it called, job description, but so like, you would think my real job is to be a benefit to the people here at this place, and then of course this place is connected to other places, so it'd be a benefit to them. And then when people like to have compassion for my coworkers and like they're suffering, actually all my coworkers are suffering a lot, so my purpose is to be of some use to them. that of use to our customers or our clients or our whatever, you know, like other companies. And then, you know, like, and like Lama said, you know, and then like it's so excellent, right, that they're, because actually if I stayed home, then there would be not much chance to practice patience, right? Nobody would, like, you know, if I'm just alone, right, in the house, then there's not much chance to practice patience. But here, hopefully people will give me a hard time, then I can, like, you know, like be patient with them and kind in response. That's like the best way to practice Dharma, actually, right? Then you know you're practicing sincerely. Like if people are nice to you, it's hard to tell sometimes, right? If people are always treating you nice and you're nice back, then you don't know, you know, maybe your motivation is just like you want them to keep treating you nice, right? But if somebody's giving you a hard time and you're being kind, then you know you're doing something different, right? Something unique like that. So like, I'm just giving examples, right? Where then like, so it all depends on your motivation, right? So then if you're sitting in traffic and you think, oh, this is great, like I'm seeing all these beings, they're all like, you know, because actually if you sit at home, right, you think like if you sit at home and you just look like this, okay, I meditate, may all beings be happy, may all beings be free from suffering, right? You meditate on loving, right? That's one thing. But actually then if you're like driving in Washington, no, those are the beings. Actually, those are the ones you were
Not all, but most beings.
so those are them. So then you can actually feel like happy, like, oh, here they are. Like finally I'm around. And then like, of course, you know, if you do that, then like you'll be a little more patient, right? Like you won't cut them off or something. So the bugs are your future. Actually, like, cause if you actually the bug example, right? Actually, Lama's Rinpoche didn't make that up, right? In that same sutra, the Sutra of Golden Light, there's a story where the Buddha. I'll just say no, then we'll stop and dedicate. But there's a story where the Buddha, what is it? Like he's with this goddess and these disciples, and this group of gods come from the god realm. Like I think it's 1,000 gods around come, and he gives a teaching, and they all gain some level of realization of the Dharma. And the goddess says. Wow, how'd that happen, or something like that. Like she asked the Buddha what happened, right? And he tells a story. He says, oh, many lifetimes ago, he tells a story when he was a doctor, and he was going around like benefiting beings, right? He wasn't yet a Buddha. He was like, he was a good person, right? So he was going around like healing illnesses, and he came upon a pond, and the pond was drying up, and there were about 1,000 fish in there that were all dying because they were, you know, like there wasn't enough water, so they were dying. And so he realized that some guy like had created like a dam to like because he wanted the water to go to his place, and so that place was drying out. And so then the future Buddha said, oh, like he felt like kind of like a sangha did for the dog. The Buddha had that kind of compassion for those fish, right? So I have to save these fish, right? So then he was trying to find a way to divert water there, but he couldn't steal it from this other guy. So finally, because he was a doctor, like who was respected in the place, he went to the king of that region, and he said, "Can I borrow some elephants and bring water there?" And the king felt gratitude to him for having healed, you know, people. So he gave him the elephants, and he brought water there, and then he like filled the pond up with water and saved the fish. And then he said, like, "Oh, they're still hungry, right?" So he sent one elephant back to his house. He brought food and he fed them, and then he went in the water with the fish, right? And he said, like, I want, like Lama Zopa does. He said, "I want you to be my disciples, and I want to benefit these beings, right?" And so he recited a teaching on dependent origination. He recited the names of some Buddhas, and then it said that when those beings died, they went to a god realm because this particular Buddha's name he recited is supposed to, if you recite it just before somebody dies, that Buddha made a vow that they would go to a god realm. So those beings went to a god realm, and they stayed there, like chilling out in a god realm until he became a Buddha, and then then they gained some realization, and it was because of that connection. So. Like now, so Gabe is going to be the Buddha of the stink bug. If Gabe can set up the right causes, right? That's the causal. Like you see what I mean? Like that's the causal relationship thing, right? So then someday when Gabe is a Buddha, right? Then like maybe one of you guys will be like some goddess there, and you'll say, Gabe when he's a future Buddha. How did that happen? These beings came here, and like Gabe will say, oh, once they were stink bugs on this place called Virginia many eons ago. That's funny. But, okay, so we should dedicate. So again, remember, like, with karma, right? We create a positive motivation, and then at the end, we dedicate the merit. So we can just think, first we should rejoice briefly, right? Here we meditated, then we contemplated a bit about the Dharma, then we resolved to try to do some positive actions, right? We tried to understand the teachings better. We tried to cultivate a motivation to create positivity in the world. So let's dedicate the merit of that, the good karma or the positive energy. Like through that, first of all, may the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that takes compassionate responsibility to benefit others, all other sentient beings, where that kind of compassionate bodhicitta has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not diminish, but increase more and more. And, through this merit, may we all be able to complete the collections of wisdom and merit to become fully enlightened to benefit all sentient beings. And through this merit, may there be peace, right? May there not be war, may not be famine, may there not be natural disasters. May all beings be kind, patient, loving with each other. May we ourselves be able to progress along the path so as to be of greater and greater benefit to others, teaching others, and inspiring others, being a positive example to others, never harming others. And may we gradually achieve stages and paths up to enlightenment so as to be of ultimate benefit to all sentient beings. May all the wishes of all the bodhisattvas and the Buddhas, Solis to Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, come true. May all the spiritual teachers live long, all the teachers who teach a path of compassion